Oh, yeah. There you go.
Here we are. Yes.
Put on your makeup. Woo!
Good morning. Good morning, Timothy. Good morning, Hiroku-san. Good morning, everybody, to everybody who is watching us on LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, or listening to us in Clubhouse. It is a pleasure to have you with us once again. I'm here with Timothy Langley, the CEO of Langley Squire, the oldest government affairs consultancy firm here in Tokyo. They're still working in this field, and if you really need somebody with expertise who to solve your problem, your challenges here in Japan, please reach out to him and his team. So, Timothy, it's very nice to see you there. So, your makeup looks great. Thank you for applying it in such a nice manner. Well, I'll give you the screen in a bit. First of all, let me tell you, or no, tell everybody actually, that we're now starting the 193rd episode of Japanese Politics One-on-One, and we are broadcasting on 4 different platforms. If you are on any of these platforms watching us now or later, please let us know that you have been there. We also have a question and answers session after Timothy finishes the briefing. So if you have any comments, any questions, observations, and so on, please let us know in the comments. So Timothy, it's up to you now.
Great. Thank you very much, Maya. Good morning, everybody. Today is October 20th, 2024, as Maya said, our 193rd episode, but also pretty significant in that number is that it's consistent and consecutive. We haven't missed a Sunday reporting to you for over 3 years, so we greatly appreciate that. The numbers have continued to grow because of the turmoil in Japanese politics and the very much undecided nature that we're going through right now. Our audience has exploded, so we really appreciate that. And as Maya suggested, please ping us or give us a like or something like that so that we know, what our audience base, what the distribution is. We don't get great analytics from all of the platforms, so it's up to you to kind of tell us or ping us one way or the other. The yen closed on Friday at $149.52 to the yen. The yen has been volatile over the last couple of weeks. Some of that is due to the new administration of Mr. Ishiba and the kind of transition that we're going from the former Kishida administration to the Ishiba administration. And we don't know much about that because as soon as he became prime minister, he announced that there was going to be a closing of the House and immediately election for all of the members of the lower house. And that's mostly what we're going to be talking about today, but there's a lot of other stuff going on, including 16 days until the U.S. Presidential election. So that's coming right around the corner. Exactly 1 week from today is election day here in Japanese politics. So there's so much going on. And like I said earlier, if for those of you who have been tuning in, we produce a synopsis about 2 or 3 days after I do my briefing so that people can read what it was that we talked about. But it already feels to me a little bit moldy after 3 or 4 days because so much stuff is going on. So to account for that, we're going to try and enhance or accelerate the synopsis that is being sent out. But also, particularly this week, Dan Harada and I will be reporting on the 24th, which is Thursday, an update on the election. So Thursday, it's 3 days before the election happens to tell you what's going on, what it potentially means, what's the fight about, who's on first base, who's on second base, and what to expect. So Dan Harada and I will do that on a noon briefing, probably 20, 25 minutes while you're eating your lunch, for those of you who are in this time zone. But we do this to keep you up to date. There's just so much that's going on and a lot of turmoil. A fellow attacked the LDP headquarters yesterday. You might not have seen this, 6 o'clock in the morning. Drove up with a K truck, had a couple of Molotov cocktails. He threw 6 of them at the LDP headquarters, and then he sped off before they could catch him. I mean, if you've driven around Nagatacho, you know that there's a very heavy police presence there, and you can imagine what that must have been like. Maybe something like Keystone Cops, where the guy stops his truck, he throws a couple of Molotov cocktails, and he speeds off. He runs over to the prime minister's residence. He crashes into the barrier there, and he's arrested immediately. So a lot of pandemonium going on very early in the morning there. And then the election for the members of the lower house here next week initiates another program of reforming all of the members, having the opening of the diet session, and then the reconfiguration of the cabinet, and the prime minister announcing what his plans are going to be going forward. So a lot of stuff happening on there. I don't want to get too much into it before Maya needs to come in and give a plug for our fabulous sponsor. But once again, I'm reporting from the beautiful offices of Langley Esquire in downtown Tokyo, about maybe 10 minutes from the diet compound, where a lot of this is happening. Maya, let me turn it over to you for a brief plug on our great sponsors.
Thank you, Timothy. Yes. Well, our first sponsor, heartfelt thank you to Kanchu, Kanagawa Chuo Jutaku, Kanchu, and James Howell for allowing us to actually breathe a little bit easier, and deliver these sessions to you every Sunday morning. So Kanchu actually provides services in the real estate field. They sell and buy real estate in Tokyo and Yokohama. They also rent out real estate in Yokohama. The company also does property management and investment property. And if you have any such project in mind, please reach out to James Howell on LinkedIn. If you are here, if you have been in Japan for a while, you already know his name and you know the name of Kanchu, but you can reach him out. You can reach James out at james@kanchu.com. Of course, his contact details are also in the description of the video on YouTube, so do not hesitate and reach out to work with them. Timothy, thank you very much for allowing me to do this. Now let's continue. And yes, just let our listeners and viewers learn more about what is happening.
Thank you, Maya. So you might scratch your head and say, I wonder why a real estate agency or a renovation company is sponsoring Langley Esquire, and or not Langley Esquire, but this program that we give to you. And the fact of the matter is, the number of foreigners that are coming into Japan has grown just so dramatically. You can't walk down the street, you can't visit any major city in Tokyo and not be, I don't know if the word is astounded. For long-term residents, it's kind of astounding, but for people who are coming here over the last maybe year or so, maybe it feels like it should be the normal pace, but it is definitely not. The Immigration Service has reported that the number of visitors is 3.31 million, up 5.8% from this time in 2023. 1/4 of these visitors are Chinese, and the rest are predominantly South Koreans and Vietnamese. The new entrants, they qualify as students, people who here are on visitors. That's up 61.6%. It equals about 16 million people just for the first half of 2024. And if you remember, you might not remember, but the pre-pandemic in 2019, the peak there was a 1.4 million. 1.4 million people were coming in, visitors. You might remember they first were talking about Kyoto being over tourist, maybe too many tourists in Kyoto at that time, a lot of Chinese. That was at 1.4 million, and currently we're at 16 million. That is absolutely huge. And year on year, the Immigration Service says it expects 34 million people by the end of 24. So these numbers that I've given you are just for the first half of 2024. The vast majority of people coming into Japan on tourist visas, student visas, that sort of thing, is predominantly from China, South Korea, Taiwan, and this is maybe 33% of a jump from 2023. And China although they were a big number in 2019, since 2019, there's been a lot of geopolitical tension there, and the nuclear treated water and the disruption of the food stocks going to China. But right now, the Chinese have a 5-fold increase since 2023, but they're still below the 2019 levels. So the Chinese government is still keeping a bit of a rap on Chinese tourism. And on the other side of that, the Japanese going outside of Japan, those numbers are about 5.8 million. It's a 60% increase from last year, but it's only a quarter of what we saw in 2019. So the long-term trend is that the Japanese are traveling overseas less. There are fewer students going over, fewer businessmen going. But boy, is there an onslaught of people coming to visit Japan. Japan is still cool. It's attracting a lot of attention. A lot of people are coming in, not just as new entrants, but as people who are coming in to live. Over 90 days, the number has exploded. So that's why Kanchu has decided to sponsor us, because a lot of the people in our audience are new to Japan. They're learning about Japan. They want to figure out what's going on in Japanese politics. And we're very happy and proud that we're able to be a part of your weekly routine. Getting back to things, Gigi Press reported just this last week that the Ishiba cabinet approval stands at 28%. This is great when you compare it to Mr. Kishida. Mr. Kishida was about 14 or 15% when he finally gave up the ghost and decided he wasn't going to run to become president of the LDP. But 28% to start for this administration, that is pretty shocking. It is the lowest since I think maybe Mr. Mori, which was a long time ago. He was not a very popular prime minister. But in historical sense, Mr. Kishida started at 40%, Mr. Suga started at 51%, and Mr. Abe started at 54%. And you compare that to Mr. Ishiba starting at 28%, and it does begin to tell you a little bit about the tone and the tenor of what the electorate is feeling when they're going to the polls. So they haven't been able to vote on the temper that they feel towards the LDP or towards the government since this election was held 3.5 years ago. So now they have it. There's the political scandal. There's the treatment of how the LDP handled the scandal, how people feel about the economy, that sort of thing. And there's a real shudder going through the LDP that they could lose the majority that they have. So frequently I'm in the Diet compound visiting people that I know in the Diet. I went there on Friday, and it was a ghost town. So a lot of the offices were closed. As you know, you might not know, but as you know, I hope you know, each member of the Diet has pretty much an identical office in the Diet compound. There's 3 buildings, 3 identical buildings. The one building for the upper house that has about 250 members, then 2 buildings for the lower house that has 460 members. And the offices can hold about 5 or 6 staff, and the government pays for 3 of those. And then you've got the office for the member of the Diet, and so there's almost always somebody that's manning the phones there. All of these people were gone, and that tells you that somebody gave them a call from election headquarters. Everybody's going up for election, and the call was something like, "You better get to the campaign headquarters, and you better tell your mom and your dad and your cousins to come help us, because it's possible that at the end of this, in another week or so, you're going to be out of a job, and the members are going to be out of a job. We're all going to be out of a job. You need to bring the whole court in." And this is astounding. This has never happened. I've been doing this for 40 years. This has never happened. So it was pretty shocking to me. The other thing that's very interesting is, you remember Sanai Takaichi, who ran and was defeated by Mr. Ishiba to become president of the LDP and thus prime minister. She was offered a party post, as was a couple of other people who lost in the 9-person run for prime minister. She declined it, and she said, "No, I don't want to join your administration. I don't want to have a consolation prize. I feel very bitter about how the election was run and how it was that you won and not me. So she is outside being a bit of a gadfly. One of the things that happened when Mr. Ishiba became prime minister and lining up this election, the election was accelerated very quickly by the Secretary General who he appointed, who said, although you said, Mr. Ishiba, as a candidate, you wanted to have a long period before you hold an election and give people time to talk about what the issues are going to be. It is my insistence, if I'm going to be your Secretary General, to call an election immediately. And that's what he did. And so for a lot of strategic reasons, he did that. And we can get into that a little bit later. But as a consequence of Ms. Takaichi being very angry about how it was handled, the prime minister said, in order to clean the slate and to show the population that the LDP is reforming itself, 34 members of the LDP who were implicated in the slush fund scandal, he said, are not going to be endorsed by the LDP. They're going to have some sort of retribution. The LDP is not going to endorse them. 12 of them in particular are kind of off the books. And now Ms. Takaichi is supporting them and going on the sound truck and giving them endorsements. So there's a real political stew that's building up here. I hope that wasn't too deep into the weeds, but it will be a topic of conversation once we go through the election and dissect what actually happened and the kind of tensions between Takaichi and the current prime minister with Mr. Taro Aso and Mr. Suga and Mr. Kishida. This is a really interesting soup. And once again, one of the reasons why I just can't cover it all here. Dan Harada and I will hit it again on Thursday. So we hope to see you there. Projections are currently that the LDP is going to lose 50 plus seats. And I think they've kind of decided that they need to be okay with that with their coalition partner. But the numbers are not very good. If they lose 58 seats between them and Komeito, and Komeito also is not, the projections are that Komeito is going to lose some seats too. You could be looking at a new shift in Japanese politics where the LDP does not hold a majority. It can't dictate all of the committee chairs. It can't push legislation through smoothly. It requires cooperation from Komeito, who doesn't hold the same position on several issues, but it also might encourage the LDP to bring in another coalition partner. And some of the opposition parties are kind of jockeying for place now. The Democratic People's Party is kind of jockeying in place for a position with the Constitutional Democratic Party, and Ishin-no-kai is kind of jockeying in place for consideration as a potential coalition partner should the LDP fall, numbers fall. So it's something that's very, very volatile right now. The GG press is pretty harsh on the administration typically. So their numbers are going to be a little bit stricter than some of the others, NHK in particular, which is favorable to the administration. But the GG press came out with a poll just the other day that said that 26% of the people polled said that they'll vote for the LDP, 10% for the Constitutional Democratic Party, 5.2% for Komeito, and 4.3% for Ishin-no-kai. In response to other questions that were asked in the poll, 45% said, well, you know, I guess I would rather have the LDP continue in the government because the last time the LDP wasn't running the government, everything became so confused and screwed up. So let's stay with the LDP, but I kind of don't like them, but I might vote for them if the candidate is appealing to me. 27% of those polled said, I want to change. We need to change the government. We need to give one of the opposition parties a chance, and we need to kick these bums out. And once again, as in most elections, 63% said, I don't feel, I'm ambivalent. Convince me, and then when I go into the voting booth, I'll make my decision. So that's the swing vote, and I think that's what the candidates are attempting to appeal for right now. So moving on, we've talked about the number of entrance into the Japanese population. Let me see, where else are we? The House of Representatives. So just to get into the weeds a little bit, there are 465 seats in the lower house. It's divided into two groups. 289 of those are single seat districts. And that means that the people who vote for the candidate vote for that individual. They have to write their name in the ballot box. So when Japanese people go in to vote, they get two ballots. One is for the single seat, and then in the same district, sometimes it's a wider district than the individual running. It's a block vote. They vote for the party, and there are 176 of these seats. This is for proportional representation. So for example, the LDP or the Komeito will have a list of candidates that they have listed up there, and if the population votes a certain percentage, then you click off the names as they appear on the list. When Mr. Ishiba said, I'm not going to support or endorse these 34, what it also meant was not only is he not going to stand on the truck and say, these are great guys, he's not going to give them any kind of endorsement like that. It also means that they can't sit on both of these charts. So in many instances, if you're running for a seat in the lower house, if you don't win the seat based on your own personal personality or your history or that sort of thing, because you wrote a book or you're a famous sports star, you can also put your name on the LDP proportional list. And if you win, your name comes off, the next person comes up. If you lose and your name is close to the top, then you can still become a member of the parliament. And they do that to try and keep the circle and the number of educated and experienced Diet members constant. But these 34 individuals can't do that. They can only run in one or the other. And so we expect that many, you can imagine in a competition like this, and if you've taken money and put it in your pocket, you didn't report it, it's illegal for anybody else except these members of the Diet who did that very secretly. It's very difficult for you to imagine that they're going to win their election. There are some close calls, and in many of these seats, there are 2 or 3 or 4 people running for that seat. And what happens is, let's say the LDP has a candidate, and you have 2 or 3 competitors for that seat in the opposition. Even though there's a lot of disdain felt for the LDP member because he might have pocketed some money, not all of them, you can have 2 or 3 candidates who are also running that split the vote, and the LDP member still continues to win just because the vote was split. So the dynamics and the strategy of the opposition parties on running candidates in those positions is very delicate. And that explains one of the reasons why Mr. Ishiba decided to hold the election very quickly. He didn't want to give time to the opposition party to coalesce forces to decide between the Communist Party and the Constitutional Democratic Party how many seats, in how many districts you're going to run a candidate and we're going to run a candidate, and it's smarter if we only run one. So you run your candidate there and I will abstain from running a candidate. But over here in this district where you have a candidate, please pull him off and let me run my candidate. So it's more of a one-on-one race. So I think the word is out based on the GG Press and the what's going on in the campaign right now, how people are feeling, and what the polls are saying is that the LDP is going to lose, the Komeito is going to lose. It could be a shift in the government, and it creates a lot of opportunity. It creates a lot of anticipation. We've been here before and been spoiled by the end results, for those of you who have been through a couple of election cycles. So you know that, and I appreciate you tuning in to this briefing because a lot will be decided over the next 6 days. So the last day of election is on Saturday, and then the voting will come in. The other thing that's kind of interesting, I don't know if I got into this enough, early voting started on the day after the elections began. So you can start voting the day after the election starts. And in the last election, 28% of the votes cast were early voting, and they're beginning to pull these in, and I think that's the result of that early voting has set the panic throughout the LDP. In the last election, there was a total of 58 million votes cast. It's a different situation than we have in the United States. You might remember the last time there was a presidential election, there was a lot of confusion there. It's not as confusing in this area, and the mail-in votes or the early balloting doesn't have that kind of suspicion around it. So the early voting is now dictating a lot of what the LDP is going to be doing and how the candidates are approaching the population. But it is a very hot time. You can't be in any place in Tokyo or throughout Japan and not hearing the sound trucks. And for those of you that don't know, the sound trucks are important because when you go into the ballot box and you're voting for the candidate, in Japanese election law, you have to write the name of the candidate. You don't fill in a blank and you don't punch a number. You have to physically write the name. So that's why the sound trucks are constantly repeating the candidate's name, and why you see them written, what they're, how you write their name, either in kanji or hiragana, so that the likelihood that they're not going to misspell the name, because if they misspell the name, the keystroke is different. They've missed a dot above the Chinese character. It's a misspelled, and it is canceled as a valid vote. So it's very important that they do that. The sound trucks somewhat cover that. Let me see. Yes, so in the end, and we'll be getting into this with Dan and myself, and then next Sunday when we have this briefing again, the LDP needs 261 seats to hold a stable majority. Currently, it has 288 seats together with Komeito. The LDP by itself holds 256 seats. So by itself, it doesn't have a stable majority, but it has a simple majority. And if they lose 50 seats, and which is predicted right now, and Komeito loses 10 or 6 seats, that means the coalition does not eclipse that thin line where it's 50% of the 465 seats. This year, there are 1,344 candidates vying for that. So it is very tough. For the first time in Japanese election history, women account for more than 20% of the candidates. This is a big deal. 314 women are running as candidates. That's a big deal. And there's a large number coming from the LDP as well. That's about it for the politics in Japan going on right now. It is very hot season. A lot will be happening this week. Please stay tuned for our Thursday afternoon briefing, and then once again on Sunday at the same time. We're not going to know the election results when I give this briefing next Sunday, but we're going to have a pretty good idea about it. And probably as a result of that, Dan and I will probably have another briefing in the week following to tell you what it means, what's going to happen with the prime minister. Does he have to fall on his sword? Is he out? Is it going to be the shortest term for a Japanese prime minister? Are we going to have a new prime minister? What's going to happen there? All of that is an open book at this current time. So please stay tuned. Maya, back to you. We'll do the Q&A now.
Yes, thank you very much for that, Timothy. Okay, so before we continue with the Q&A, we already have questions which we received during the week, the past week, and also we have questions we received this morning, and questions are coming in as well right now as we're talking about this. So thank you very much for that, sharing comments, observations, questions, and everything with us. And before we continue with the Q&A, Timothy, I would like to say once again, this time, thank you, this time to Houze Inc., the other sponsor of ours. So Houze Inc., a big thank you to you for sponsoring this and other podcasts of Japan Expert Insights. So to those of you who are tuning in for the first time and for the others who have been here before, please remember the name of Houze Inc. So the company offers bilingual services in custom home design, construction and renovations, and it also does commercial building construction. In order to benefit from their customized services in either Japanese or English, please connect with Hana Uroshizawa Howell on LinkedIn, and you'll find her contact details in the description of the video on YouTube. Once again, Hana Uroshizawa Howell and Houze Inc. on LinkedIn and YouTube. Thank you so very much for being our sponsors. Now let's go into the Q&A session. Timothy, I'll start with the questions from earlier this week. And please forgive me for, okay, just a moment. I've got here, yes, quite a few of them actually. So the first one, I've got this screenshot. All right, it comes from Repost, somebody whose handle name on YouTube is Repost. And the question is, okay, Ishiba-san has taken a step back on making, forgive me for this. Oh, wow, it's a kind of, where did I get this? Okay, on making changes to marriage. Name the names, for married people, especially women, and same-sex marriage. So, well, the person writing this says, I guess that this is because, well, he needs to get the conservatives on his
right.
side. Yes, you said that's right. So do you have any comments on this, Timothy?
So the Liberal Democratic Party is the conservative party, probably the most conservative party. It represents big business. It represents, within the LDP, a very conservative arm, a medium conservative, and somewhat liberal conservative. But generally speaking, they are conservative, mostly blue for big business. And these issues on maintaining, for example, just respect for the emperor and maintaining law and order and the relationship between Japan and the United States are pretty much standard operating procedures for LDP members. It's written very clearly in the LDP manifesto that was published by the LDP just this last week. With regard to same-sex marriage and sharing of surnames or deciding not to share your surname, that seems to be the area of the Constitutional Democratic Party, a little bit more liberal on that issue. So vote for us because we're not like the LDP. We're not such sticks in the mud that we can't be more expansive about how we look at Japanese society and the move of progress. Komeito is a little bit less conservative than the LDP on that issue. But since they have a coalition government, they kind of have to swallow a little bit hard in order to accommodate that. So with the LDP, yes, they're conservative. There was a visit to Yasukuni this last week on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. It's a 3-day autumn festival at Yasukuni, which is the enshrined place for the war dead and for some of the war criminals who were executed as a consequence of the World War ending. So the prime minister didn't visit himself, but he did send a gift. There were a couple of other people who did that. And that's on the conservative side. So what's going on with the status of forces? Mr. Ishiba also backed off a little bit on having the Asian NATO and let's change the status of forces. And I think that is in line with also their conservative stance on same-sex marriages and the dedication that once you get married, the woman gives up her last name to go into the koseki of the husband. So it's rather complicated. It's not as easy as in many countries that don't have the koseki system. But I think eventually there will be changes because the pace and the momentum of that issue is probably pretty much inescapable.
Right. So thank you. You actually answered the next question of the same viewer. So is it possible for him to change course on this again? So yes. And then the next question is,
I'm
would
sorry.
Ishin, yes,
The question is it possible for Mr. Ishiba to change? I doubt it.
go back, oh no, to actually once again start talking about same-sex marriage and the name and the Koseki and so on?
If the question is Mr. Ishiba going to go back and talk about that at some point in time? I don't think
Yes.
so. I don't think he'll be
Oh
around
no,
long enough
okay.
to do that.
All right, that's okay. That's a different take from, well, what other people might expect, and me actually. Okay, and then the follow-up question, well, another question actually on this is, would Ishin, if they join the coalition, force this issue? Do you think that after the election? So more importantly, even if Ishiba had allies to force on the conservatives, how likely would such a betrayal be? So this is a kind of complicated question. I believe it is once again about, the conservatives in the LDP and Mr. Ishiba going back,
Yeah.
and having in. So you already said that probably Mr. Ishiba is not going to last that long to have time to actually go back
Mhm.
on what is happening right now.
But can I respond just a little bit? Ishin,
Yes,
if
please.
Ishin
Yes.
is invited into the coalition, it will be with terms and conditions. And I don't know if they would be willing to gamble. There are other terms and conditions that I would argue more forcefully on, but Ishin needs to expand their base of operations outside of the Kansai region. And if they are invited into a coalition with the LDP, it means that they get at least one cabinet position, but also the terms and conditions that they will extract as a consequence of that. We don't know what those particularly would be. But yes, I think if the LDP said, in order for you to come on and mediate some of your positions so that we have a more concise presentation to the Japanese population, and you're not going to bitch and moan every time we have a law that we want to pass, you're going to vote the way we want you to vote, then yes, we'll accept those concessions on your behalf. I don't know if the surname issue or the gay sex, I'm sorry, what do you call it? The same-sex marriage are the issues that they will negotiate on, but you just never know. It depends on how desperate people are and how much the LDP really needs to exceed that threshold of 50% of the lower house.
Okay, thank you very much for answering that question, Timothy. We have quite a long one, actually. It is a comment from Nicholas Hughes on YouTube. And yes, okay. So Nicholas writes, for me, the four main scenarios for some kind of conflict between China and the US are. So we're going into, regional politics here, but one, Taiwan declares independence. Two, America recognizes Taiwan as independent. Three, America establishes a military base in Taiwan. Four, something escalates out of control in the South China Sea. The
Yeah.
idea that they will someday wake up and decide to just attack or blockade Taiwan is really not credible. I would be interested in what people think about how Japan would react in the above scenarios. So, your comments on this?
Yeah, so there's some good China watchers in the audience, and I would like to give them the opportunity to opine. I think probably the blockade issue, even though you might not think it's feasible, to me, if I was China, it's less kinetic, it's less aggressive. They can do it, they can get away with it. They've got the numbers. And that would trigger something else happening. For example, one of the other scenarios that you proposed. But status quo, I think, is what the United States is just trying to maintain. And so they're trying to bring in more allies, like-minded countries, to join this force of nations to just say to China, don't do it, because if you do it, look at all of these people that are allied against you. The other thing that's kind of interesting is that the Chinese government went through a stimulus just recently, and there is great fear that the stimulus and the real estate market could potentially crash, and that's going to really reduce things. So in a situation like that, some people they regroup, they kind of bring their economy into a tighter fold, which is, I think, what Donald Trump wants to do. He wants to make America great again. So he wants to reduce the footprint and focus on the Americans and the American economy. I think likewise with Xi, there are two scenarios. One is that he begins to coalesce the empire and protect them and embellish that a little bit. The other one is you've got a tremendous army. You've got all of these armaments that you've been devoting years and years to. You might as well use them. So it is a very delicate time, and we're watching it very closely. There's always a lot of change going on there. We reported on the Canadians coming in with their Coast Guard cutters and facilitating piracy and illegal fishing. So there's a lot going on, and it just continues to grow.
Yes, there is a lot going on. I actually agree with Nicholas on that, and that's for very different reasons, but maybe that's a topic of another session. Okay, so thank you. And I'm moving on to another comment from last week, and it is from Mibi Sensei. And then the question is, it's been 10 years since the regional revitalization program started. Is this program working? Do people take it seriously, or is it just a nice rhetoric?
Oh, who is this from?
From Mibi Sensei. Sorry.
Mibi Sensei.
Yes.
So I think one of the answers there is no, it hasn't worked. And that's why Mr. Ishiba is now president of the LDP and prime minister, because one of his loudspeakers is economic revitalization for the outback, for the parts of the country, the prefectures that are not doing so well. We've also had this gerrymandering where the populations have declined in some of the prefectures and increased in others. There's this demographic shift that's going on. Many Japanese, the young Japanese, are going to the big cities, and they're leaving mom and pop and the farms and the chickens and everything in the countryside, and they're coming into the cities. They're going to college. They're getting hired by companies, and they're not going back. So the population is declining there. And the prime minister wants to revitalize that, and he's dedicated a certain amount of the budget to do that. I think, yeah, it's like tourism. The tourists are going to Kyoto, they're going to Osaka and Tokyo. They're trying to spread that out. And similarly with the economy, if you just leave that there, you're going to have over tourism. You're going to have a lot of money that's in the central cities, but in the outbacks, you're not going to have anybody but old people and autonomous vehicles picking them up and driving them to the store and to the post office and maybe to the clinic from time to time. But that hollowing out is continuing and needs to be stymied some way. And so the prime minister, the LDP, the prime minister's cabinet office is spending a lot of time on preventing that. But it is inescapable that the Japanese population is declining. And that's why we talked earlier in the briefing about the number of foreigners that are coming in. Not enough to supplement what the Japanese is losing in the economy for running stores, working in restaurants, that sort of thing. And we reported last week that the number of bankruptcies has exploded. It's the greatest since the year 2020. I'm sorry, 2000. And that's as a consequence of a lot of different factors. But there are a lot of people that are going out of business, not just because of the yen, not just because of inflation, but because they can't find enough people to work in their districts. So restaurants and hotels are suffering. Manufacturing is suffering as a result too. So I think that's a long-winded answer. I hope it responds somewhat to the revitalization issue.
Right. Okay. Thanks for that. And yes, we're moving on to, once again, another comment that came just now, because it is somewhat related to the over-tourism, which you talked a little bit earlier, and now you touched upon, and the revitalization issue. So, Byron and Yuka, please give us a bit more time before I get to your questions. So the question is from Hiroko-san, once again. So she writes, due to over-tourism, many tourist destinations are experiencing dual pricing. For example, a chicken or beef skewer can cost 1,000 yen, Additionally, acts of terrorism against the LDP headquarters and Yamibaito, illegal part-time jobs, are often seen lately. I learned that this kind of phenomena is commonly seen in underdeveloped countries. What are your thoughts on this?
Wow, that's from Hiroko.
Yes.
Could we divide that into like 3 different questions?
Yes, we can, definitely. The first one is, well, basically the double pricing in
Double
some
pricing. So that
destinations. Yes.
I think for most people that's just distasteful. How come
Mhm,
I went to a stall and the Japanese kid in front of me, he pays something, I see the payment going over, and then I walk in and then I have to pay a little bit more. I
mhm,
understand that disdain. On the other hand, from the sellers and from the locals' perspective, the foreigners come in, they put a lot of weight on the infrastructure, on the social services, on the taxis, the buses, and stuff like that. And it really squeezes out and makes life a little bit more difficult for the residents and for the shopkeepers and that sort of thing. And the kid that comes in to buy something, it's an easy transaction. The foreigner comes in and he says, "How much is that?" And can you speak English? And so there is more of a cost involved. But when you're selling something for a defined price, it's capitalism. You're supposed to pay that one price for it. So I think it turns tourists off, and
mm.
I don't know how they're going to deal with it. I think the Japanese government just needs to establish a standard for that, and maybe somehow increase the benefit through other means for them to tolerate all of this over tourism. Because over tourism, tourism itself is great. It's like free money. These people come to your country, they spend money, and then they leave. They don't leave much of a footprint. They buy products or they consume products. They stay in hotels. They leave money, and then they're gone, and it's recurring. So tourism is good. You want to supplement that. You want to enhance it. You want it to go to greater areas throughout Japan, but it does have a cost to it. And part of the cost is that people, Maya, we've had this conversation many times. Part of the cost is that they just haven't prepared for it. They knew it was coming. They didn't do the infrastructure right. They didn't prepare for the amount of people that were coming in. And so as a consequence of that, they're suffering. So they'll fix it now. And then maybe in 5 years, it will be nice and clean. And who knows, maybe the next tourism destination throughout the world will be Tehran or something. Who knows?
Who knows? Yes, I think that it is actually a more complex issue because, as you said, some of the places, some of the destinations do not have the necessary infrastructure for that many visitors. Others do have it, but they do not get that many visitors. And so, obviously, it is important that we think about the policies as. Yes, Manabe-san wrote, it is important we think about the policies of distribution,
Mm-hmm.
of tourist flow distribution, how it is distributed. Because once again, I have said it before and I still stand behind what I said. It's not over tourism, it's just lack of management.
Yeah.
So it feels like over tourism in 2 or 3 or 4 destinations, but otherwise it's not. I mean, if you spread those tourists throughout the country, the territory of the country, it's going to be, something which does not put that much pressure on the local ecosystems, the local infrastructure and the economies there. So once again, we need policies for that, and there are policies, but they haven't been applied very well, I believe. So that's what we need to focus more on.
The other,
Yes.
the other, the other complication there too, Maya, is when people come to visit Japan, you might just think that English is the international language, so they're coming in and they speak a little bit of English. They're not going to speak Japanese, maybe.
Right.
I mean, Japanese is not a very well-traveled language, so they might speak English. But when you look at the numbers, the vast majority, 1/4 of the people who are coming in are Chinese. So they're going to
Mm-hmm.
attempt to speak Japanese with a Chinese accent, and it's just not going to work. And then you've got the South Koreans who generally will speak some Japanese and, in fact, English as well. But the second and the third are the Taiwanese and the Vietnamese. and people from the Western nations is a very small percentage of the overall total. So it's not just going into the shop and saying, how much is that? It's, it's in Chinese, and sometimes the manners and the way that they shop at home is not really very considered polite, or the way that you do it here. You don't spit on the floor. You don't leave your food on the table, that sort of thing. And trash, how you leave your trash.
Yeah, but once again, I believe that this is on the local authorities to actually prepare the visitors for that,
Yeah.
and to educate them how to behave in their communities. So, and maybe not just the local authorities, but the JNTO needs to do that job as well, even before the tourists come. They have been trying that, I know, but
Yeah.
obviously, yes, it has to be.
Well, there's
created.
Sorry, I didn't mean to jump in on you.
No, go ahead. That's fine.
There's so much cultural context that goes on here. So, for example, and we've had this comment from one of our longtime listeners too, where's the trash can? So you buy something or you're eating something and there's no trash can. So what do? You just drop it on the floor. And people aren't well aware of why there are no trash cans, or where the trash cans are, or what you're supposed to do. And so you have this trash problem that just generates ire, because the Japanese, you walk through any Japanese city, it's almost spotless. Tokyo is always clean. There's always somebody sweeping the streets. You never see cigarette butts or gum or trash on the streets. And that's one of the attractions, but it is because of this social network.
Yes, indeed. Well, so Hiroko-san, I hope that this answered your question, even though it was a kind of a long answer. Yes, and Hiroko-san writes again, despite the high prices, inbound visitors are still willing to pay because of the weak yen. And that's true too.
Yeah.
Yes, the yen is weak and it doesn't make that much a difference for them. But, the yen is not going to be weak forever. At least that's what we have learned, from the past 2.5 decades. So
Yes.
let's see what happens. Okay, thank you very much for that. And then, so I move on this time to the question of Byron. And once again, we are moving into the external politics or geopolitics, the realm of geopolitics. Let me find where did it go?
Byron is a long-term attendee. He's always contributing questions. I think he's like in New York or something like that. So when we're doing our live briefing, he's asleep. So he provides these very pithy questions and kinds of traps me into making a statement that I'd rather just keep quiet about. But thank you very much, Brian, and we'll do our best to respond to your questions.
Yes. So that's what Byron wrote, actually. And thanks a lot again, Byron. And the question of, for today's,
Here we
why
go.
is it that, yes, okay. Why is it that the most mundane issues feature prominently in the truncated 2 weeks election campaign, such as whether husband and wife should have the same last name? Existential issues for Japan, such as the consequences of the potential fall of Taiwan when China will be 100 kilometers away from Yonaguni, Japan, that has profound implications for Japan's exclusive economic zone as per the law of the sea, as well as the humongous debt load that Japan is carrying don't appear to concern the voters and political class. Could you comment on this discrepancy, please?
No.
No. Right. Well,
So,
may I have a word before, I mean, to let you prepare, your answer to this question. So, Byron, again, this is all a matter of perspective, I believe. And of course, in a campaign, which is so critical for the leading party at the moment, they're never going to touch upon, the tremendous internal debt, of course.
no.
And so that's one thing. But depending on where you look at these issues from, within Japan or out of Japan. So I think that, the angle is different, and the weight of these issues is also different. So let's see what Timothy can say, whether he still refuses to answer your question.
So I've been doing Japanese politics for a long time. You know, after I finished law school in Japan, I worked inside the parliament for an LDP member, and he was actually in the Abe faction. It wasn't called the Abe faction then, it was called the Fukuda faction a long time ago. And one of the jobs that I had was on elections. So whenever somebody in the Abe faction was having an election, my member would go, he'd stand on the truck and make a speech, and I always traveled with him and facilitated when I could or how I could. And election campaigns here are very much personality driven. And the dicey issues, it's like Maya said, if I talk about the debt to income ratio, people are going to say, that's because of you. That's your fault. You're spending the money and you're not generating the money, and you're making it into a stimulus package, as Mr. Ishiba will do as soon as this election is over. There will be another stimulus package that's issued. And they don't really like to talk about that. But when you look at, for example, the sophistication of the typical voter, and I don't mean this in a demeaning way, but if you look even at Japanese television, if you're a news hound and you're watching NHK or you're watching typical Japanese news, it is very insular. It's very much about the country. There's some regional news, very little international news, unless it's something really big. But there's not a lot of analysis. There's not a lot of depth to it. There's no political satire. You don't see comedy shows that make fun of the government or make fun of, what a politician did. So this discourse that goes on in many countries doesn't occur here. So as a consequence, I think the level of discourse is tapped down. And I think that, when people go to the voting booth, it's not because of these super big issues. It's because I like that person. I feel trust with him. I like what he said. I think I know his family, or he came to my sister's wedding, something like that. And so that personal stickiness is so important here. And that's why you see these. And Mr. Ishiba is famous about going out and shaking people's hands and being out in the hinterland and talking to people and giving stump speeches. He's very well known for that. And I think that supported him well. But the big ticket items, yes, you would think that there would be a little bit more discussion. And I don't have a better response than what I just gave. And I hope it's not considered to be derogatory towards, the press or the administration or the Japanese people in general. But I think it's a reflection on my experience in dealing with Japanese politics.
Yeah, right. And also from my observations here, I think that among the general population, there aren't so many people who do think that China would get so close. They have been living after the Second World War. The Japanese population has been living in peace for almost 8 years.
Yeah.
And they've seen a lot of let's say, turmoil within China, a lot of incursions by Chinese vessels into the Japanese economic zone, and so on and so on. But things have never escalated so far, and I believe that there is also that lack of sense of threat among the general population. I know that within the government, Kasumi Gaseki and so on, there is, that heightened sense of the threat, that China poses, of course. But I think these are two different things at the moment.
On the other hand, though, the Japanese population doesn't really know what's going on. There are threats, there are cyber attacks, there are things that are happening that just don't come out into the open. NHK,
Right.
which is somewhat the mouthpiece of the government, so it gives the news that it's told to give. I don't think everybody gets the full picture, and it's okay, because what the administration wants is a stable, quiet, moving machine of the Japanese economy. That's the most important thing, because the economy still is suffering very badly. It's been suffering for 20 or 30 years. Trying to get that engine back it's not enhanced by having the people scared about cyber attacks or about submarines that are coming close to shore and conking people on the head and then taking them into the submarine and then going back to their country. There's a lot of stuff that just doesn't come into the public eye. But yeah, I think that's also by design.
Right. Yeah, I think that there is a lot of stuff that is not known to both sides actually. And what is, of course, there is always a lot of information pumped out that serves the
Yes,
current status quo, right? And that's,
the
as you said,
propaganda. Yeah.
yes, at the moment, that is, the Japanese government wants a quiet, well-running economy, so, and they cannot afford to do anything else. But okay, so once,
Oh,
yes.
it's just to wrap that up. That's not to point a finger at Japan, because look at what's going on in the United States. I mean, that is replete. The fake news, the lies, the propaganda. I mean, it is full tilt right now, and it will be for the next 2 weeks.
Well, yes, and still, yeah, okay, I'll leave it at this
Okay.
point of time. Okay, so, all right, and then I'll move on to the next question. It is a question from Yuka this time. So, Yuka, she's not with us today because, well, she's got other things to do, but the question came before we started the briefing. So, well, I'm not sure if I can listen to today's session live, so allow me to post my question before the briefing starts. Timothy, could you please remind us of Mr. Ishiba's policy on nuclear energy? I'm asking because Google, Amazon, and Microsoft are all eager to secure nuclear energy to support their
Yeah.
AI operations. Thank you
Yes.
for your answer, Hans.
Great question. So, broadly speaking, one can say, if you're guessing what Mr. Ishiba's policies are, they are represented by what Mr. Kishida's policies were, broadly speaking. So there are a couple of differences, but on the economy, on not so much on the military, but I think he's leaning back towards the military, the Kishida policy, the 2% GDP, embellishing the Japan self-defense forces, working in more collaboration with the status of forces agreement and the United States. I don't think that that's going to change, even though he had a little bit of an idea to cleverly come up with something and to fix some issues that he's long complained about. But I think he's backshelved that. With nuclear energy, he has said he's going to continue with decarbonization, as Mr. Kishida said. He's going to continue with nuclear power as a component of the mix, as an important component of the mix, which is a little bit different from what the Constitutional and Democratic Party's position is. So people who want a cleaner environment, they don't want the nuclear power, they want more windmills, they want more solar panels, they want more of that renewable energy, then the distinction there between the LDP and some of the other parties is rather drastic. With regard to Mr. Ishiba, he's going to continue with the nuclear policy that was established by Mr. Kishida, decarbonization, almost complete decarbonization by 2050.
Right. If you don't mind me commenting, though, I think that there is, in general, not only in Japan, of course, but even in Europe, European countries, and also other parts of the world, there is a general, let's come back to nuclear energy.
Yeah.
Because I think that governments have realized that the renewables, they cannot supply the necessary energy for not only, of course, AI, but all the data centers that are being built and that will be built in the future, the near future. So basically, renewable energy is not viable at this point of time, and we do not have the technology to make it viable yet. So I think that basically it's happening in Japan, but not only here, in many other countries around the world as well.
Mm-hmm.
And
Well,
yeah, go
go
ahead.
ahead.
Sorry.
No, I was just going to
No,
say that nuclear doesn't produce carbon. So it's if you want to reduce your carbon footprint, nuclear is a great way to go.
yeah, there are also other things, going on in the industry at the moment, information going on about pollution, because one of the greatest, what's that, opposition points or points against nuclear was the waste of the reactors. But it turns out that renewable energy sources also produce a lot of waste, once they are beyond their productive life. So, and it's tit for tat actually at the
Yes.
moment. So
Right.
I think that the jury is out there. Is that what you say in English,
The jury
Timothy?
is still out.
Is still out, yes, and
Yeah.
we'll see what Okay, thank you for this. I see. Well, Hiroko-san also wrote that she wants us to address the second part of her comment, and I tried to see which one that was,
Yeah,
but
she had
maybe
a three-part question, and you bifurcated them, and
it's
I think we only talked for 15 minutes about the first one.
right. Okay, that's actually the acts of terrorism against the LDP headquarters and the Yami Baito, that is the illegal or the gray zone part-time jobs. So the
Okay,
terrorism and acts of aggression against them. So she
so
wrote also, I heard that, this kind of phenomenon is commonly seen in underdeveloped countries. So what are your thoughts on this?
So the reason why you might see a little bit more of that in underdeveloped countries is because there is no outlet, or maybe the structure of the police or the government or the laws or the application of the laws is out of balance. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that there are few avenues for people who are really angry at the LDP or at Mr. Abe or at the Unification Church to express that in a legal and effective way. So it's a structured society. Everybody knows Japan is a very structured society. But if you have an issue, there are only a few avenues that you can go to get redress. And most of the time, if you are a victim, you just continue to be the victim as you go through this process. And so it does generate, frustration, and this shogunai kind of attitude that even though I've become a victim and it's against the law and the perpetrator should be punished, what are you going to do? He's not going to get arrested. The police aren't going to do anything. And so people take matters into their own hands. And very rarely will Japanese people do that. They're so mad that they're going to step out and they're going to make a Molotov cocktail and they're going to throw it, or they're going to make a handmade gun and they're going to shoot the prime minister or something like that. So it is rather a rare occurrence here. And when it happens, it hits the news and it's a big deal. But I think it's a very, very small percentage. On Yami Baito, that's a very different issue here. Yami Baito, I think, as people in the audience know, it's the opportunity for me to make some extra money. I sign onto a website, somebody told me about it, and I can make $100 or $500 or $1,000 by picking up this side job. So I called the guy and he says, this is what I want you to do. It's you're part of a chain of events and your job is to do this. And when everything is done, the guy in the background has an end result, and he has a bunch of watches, or he has a bunch of gold bars, or somebody's conked an old person on the head and taken their savings from their house, that sort of thing. So I think this is a sophistication that has been generated by the internet and also by the criminal element. So most people know that crime is very low here in Japan, but crime exists. It's just a different kind of crime. You don't have a lot of violent crime. You don't have bank robberies. You don't have people that are being stabbed. But crime does exist here. And I think the criminal element here, initially, Yami Baito was initiated from a jail cell in the Philippines. So the phone calls and the scams and the information that was being shared started from a jail cell in the Philippines by Japanese gangsters. That's how it initially started, but I think it's actually grown so much more. On those two issues, the Japanese police agency has dedicated far more police for protection of the candidates in the elections today. So you'll see much more of a heavy police presence for people who are expressing violence. So the Molotov cocktails that were thrown at the LDP and then the guy escaped more than 800 meters to the prime minister's office. That's wow. I can't even imagine how that must have looked. I would love to see the film on that. But also with regard to Yami Baito, the police agency is big time on top of that and trying to chase down the leaders here and how they get the information. There's been a map of Tokyo that showed the various residences that have been hit. And it's a distance outside of Japan, and it's kind of in a semicircle. And they believe it's an organized package of these criminals. But I think it's not widespread. It's just a couple of gangs who have collected that information. Eventually, they'll get their hands on it. But yeah, there's a lot of crime that goes on. Just most of it is unreported. reported until somebody is physically hit or they're taped up and thrown in the corner and maybe they stop breathing or they die, and then it becomes a huge issue. And that's the area that we're in right now. That doesn't mean that I think Japan is an undeveloped country. I think it's just this new wave of crime that is just being initiated.
Right. And well, thank you very much for this comment, Timothy. It looks like we have. Oh, okay, another one from Hiroko-san. Yes, actually, three phenomena or incidents: double pricing, yamibaito, and terrorism against political parties or lawmakers are often seen in underdeveloped countries. And my concern is Japan is not underdeveloped, but quality of Japanese good culture and tradition are going away. Yeah, I think that a lot of people actually have this concern, Hiroko-san, about the Japanese traditional culture and, the social safety nets. They're being broken to a certain extent, and that naturally, leads to an increased amount of crime as well. So, and maybe that is the reason as well that a lot of people here are also against immigration, illegal, also maybe massive immigration, legal massive immigration as well. So it is a complex matter, I believe, and it will continue to be discussed. I believe also on our podcast, but not only there. Yes.
This becomes a favorite topic of ours, Maya, not just because we're long-term residents, but also you have a show on Wednesday mornings where you invite speakers, or maybe you and Tim Sullivan talking about various cultural issues.
Yes.
And those of us that have been here for a long period of time, the learning curve of when you first arrive, the first couple of years, it is very tough, mastering the language, mastering the bows and the social niceties and things like that. It does take a couple of years, but once you've kind of crossed that threshold, it's almost as if you don't want to go back to your home country, because the benefits of living here, the cultural things that made you fall in love with this country from the beginning, are the things that really anchor you here. And it's very delicate, and they're underpinned by a social structure that could be damaged very easily. So the safety, and we were talking about this just the other day, Maya, that in many European countries, as a woman, you cannot walk at night and feel safe. You'd feel you just wouldn't do it. But here in Japan, in any city, at any time of the day, a well-dressed woman can walk and not have any fear that she's going to be attacked or molested or somebody conk her on the head. It just almost it's unheard of. But it's not just that safety net, but it's the whole spectrum of why Japan is such a special place and why it's such an attraction for people throughout the world. I mean, Japan is the hotspot for tourists these days. They want to see what it's like, what the samurai culture produced 500 years later, what the culture in Yasukuni and Mount Fuji and all of these things. It's just so super cool that people have recognized that, but it is a delicate balance.
It is a delicate balance as well, indeed. Hopefully, it will be preserved. I think that everybody wants that, and it will be preserved in a way that, actually helps everybody who is here and the visitors as well, not just the residents of the country. Well, thanks a lot for this. And Timothy, now, yes, you can breathe out, or you can breathe a sigh of relief, because we have come to the end of the questions, at least for the moment.
Maya, it's not that I don't enjoy this time with you and with the audience. I very much look forward to it. But yes, it is Sunday morning, and there are always things going on. And yes, I'm leading a pretty like you. I mean, you've got a family and you got things going on too. So thank you very much for your dedication, Maya.
To your dedication too. Yes. Well, it's more difficult for you than it is to me. So thank you very much, Timothy. I appreciate that, and I'm sure that everybody does. So yes, yeah, and hopefully we'll see you once again next Sunday, 8:20. Yes,
Also
thank you,
Tuesday, I'm
Hiroko-san.
sorry, Thursday with Dan Harada at noon.
Thursday, yes, with Dan Harada. So the live stream will be on Langley Squire's accounts on YouTube and LinkedIn. So check out Langley Squire Thursday. That is October the 24th. That's my birthday too. So,
Woo!
woo! Yes, and 12 o'clock at noon. But of course, if you cannot make it at 12 o'clock, you can watch the briefing later because it will be recorded and available after it is over. Okay, thanks a lot. And now, once again, I would like to say thank you very much to our two sponsors, Kanagawa Chuo Jutaku or Kanchu and Houze Inc. So, Kanagawa Chuo Jutaku Kanchu with James at kanachu.com and Houze Inc. with Hana Urushizawa Howell. Reach out to them if you have in mind any projects in the field of real estate. They will be there for you to speak with you either in English or in Japanese and to customize their services to your specific needs. Thanks a lot. That's all for today, Timothy.
Thank you, Maya. See you next week.
See you next week. Yes. To everybody, have a beautiful Sunday. Enjoy the weekend.
Click, click, click.